So I am thrilled to be here. I love coming to Grand Rapids. I grew up in Grand Rapids at a time when it was known as Furniture City, not Beer City. It always amazes me now coming home that it's like, this is Beer City now. I love that. But you couldn't buy beer in Grand Rapids on Sundays when I was growing up here. So it's great to be with you. I am going to make this more of a dialogue instead of a monologue. I know you've listened to a lot of people speak, but I want to listen to you as well as talk to you. So I think that that's really important. So I want to just start by telling you a little bit about me, what motivates me and why I'm running, and then I want to open this up so that it is that dialogue that I was talking about. So I filed my paperwork to run for governor back January 3rd, and a lot of people thought, thank you. A lot of people thought that might have been too early, but I got to tell you, on November 9th, when I dusted myself off and decided I was going to continue living, and where the heck was I going to channel all this anger and anxiety and concern and fear, I decided I'm going to run for governor. And I'm going to get organized and get in this thing as early as possible. And I received a check from a woman who sent it to me. It was $20.18 with the hopes that I run in 2018. And I always point that out because it's so important for women, especially, to encourage one another to think about running for office. For whatever reason, we do not look in the mirror on the day that we are born and say, I'm going to be president of the United States. We come up with, I'm old, I'm too old, I'm too young, I haven't had enough experience. We come up with every reason to challenge ourselves, to put another hurdle in front of ourselves, where men just don't do that. And that's why it's so important to encourage other women to think about running for office. So, how many of you are thinking about running for office? I know you are, Tammy. We're going to get you elected, and Julia. Excellent. I think anyone in this room right now, today, with the experience that you have in life, whether you have retired or you're just starting a career or you're somewhere in between, could walk into our state capitol and do as good a job as any of those, as most of those people, if not better, right now. So don't hold yourself back by wondering if you have what it takes. Now, I've lived my whole life here in Michigan, and I am proud to be from Michigan. I am raising my daughters, who are 13 and 15, here as well. And I look around at the Michigan that they're growing up in, and it doesn't even resemble the one that I think of when I talk about how proud I am to be from this state. What parents want all across the state is I'm traveling, whether I'm in Gogibbet County on the western end of the Upper Peninsula, or I'm in Allegan County where I was this morning, or I'm right here in Kent County at this moment. People want to be able to know that they're going to hug their kids in the morning and send them off to a school that's giving them the skills they need to be successful in life. They want to know that no matter who you are, who you love, what community you come from, or what you look like, you've got a good opportunity to be successful right here in Michigan. And they want to know that you can retire with dignity, that your pension's not all of a sudden going to be taxed and your retirement compromised, and that you can enjoy a great quality of life right here in Michigan. That's what people want. And you know what? That's not too much to ask from our state. That's not too much to ask from the leaders, the people that are supposed to be looking out for our interests. Now, I spent my whole life here, I told you that, but I was raised in a household where my dad was a Milliken Republican and my mom was a Frank Kelly Democrat. And when I say that, I don't mean they just voted for them. My dad was actually in the Milliken administration. He was the director of commerce for Governor Milliken. And my mom was actually one of Frank Kelly's top lawyers at the Attorney General's office. So we had a lot of interesting discussions in our household. But as you can imagine, those discussions, because of the leaders with whom they served, were about the public interest. They're about finding common ground where you can, around issues that should not be partisan, like the education of our kids, the skills training for our workforce, our environment. How is environment a partisan issue now, when water quality impacts every Republican, every Democrat, every independent, everyone? Now, I am no stranger to tough fights. I served many years in the legislature, and during that time, I took on a lot of tough fights. I'll tell you this about myself. I don't go out of my way looking for fights, but I don't back down from them either. When I was the prosecutor in Ingham County, the judges in my area asked me to go in and restore integrity to the prosecutor's office, and I took that on. When I was the Senate Democratic leader and the governor decided to undercut working people in Michigan, I took him on. And I've even taken on my own governor when she tried to take money out of the school aid fund to bolster the general fund. I am not afraid to take on anyone who I think is challenging what makes this state great and what the kids and people of this state need. And I'm proud of that. But I also know enough to know from the household I grew up in, all the ideas don't stem from one area in the state or from one party in the state, that Michigan is at its best when everyone's voice counts. And that's why when the governor pushed right to work and literally locked the people out of our Capitol, I threw open the doors to the Capitol and we led the resistance from within my office in that building. Because I know government doesn't work unless it works for the people. Government doesn't work if the voices of the people are shut out. And government doesn't work if it's government that happens to you instead of government that comes from you. We deserve better in Michigan. We are here to demand better in Michigan. And I think like every parent, you know, I stayed in Michigan. When I graduated from school and then law school, I decided to stay in Michigan and make my home here. Because it's a state that I love and my family's here. And I'm really glad that I did. Because when my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer, that meant I was here to take care of her. My first term in the legislature, at the age of 30, found myself a member of the sandwich generation. And I see some of you nodding and some of you not quite sure what that means. It means that I was simultaneously taking care of a child at the beginning of her life and a parent at the end of her life. And as stressful as those 2 years were, especially as a new legislator at the same time, I am so grateful that I was here to be able to do that. I was so grateful that I was here in Michigan. And I think about my kids, and I hope that they want to stay in Michigan. I think about every child in Michigan, and I want them to be able to pursue their path and have every opportunity right here in Michigan. Michigan at one point meant the best education, and now too few kids have the skills they need to be successful. Michigan represented the best of the best, and now we are struggling and the people of the state are struggling. It's on us to rebuild this state, to demand the type of Michigan, the type of leadership that we deserve. And that's why I'm running for governor. So with that, I think I'd like to open it up and make this more of a dialogue so that we can talk about what you want to see in the platform that I'm working on building. So let's do that. Ready? All right, who wants to go first? Oh, me? Okay, here we go.
Flint.
Yes.
Flint water.
Okay, that is a question. It didn't sound like one, but it is. Yeah, no, absolutely. Flint water. So when I was in the legislature, I was the Senate Democratic leader. And when I took my oath of office, the Democrats had just lost the House, and that meant as the leader in the Senate, I was now the counterpoint to every Republican in state government. The governor ran through the Emergency Management Act. We always had an Emergency Management Act in Michigan, but it was emergency management on steroids, which absolutely took away a local community, whether it was a school district or it was a city, their whole ability to govern themselves, to undo contracts, to break promises to people that the city or the school district had contracts with. The people of the state, by a referendum, defeated that statute, and then the Republicans ran it again and put money in it to avoid the people's right of referendum. I'm telling you right now, as governor, I will veto any piece of legislation that has money in it to avoid the people's right of referendum. So I'm always thinking, how many red flags did this governor and this Republican government run through before they figured out that they had poisoned the city? We just acknowledged the 3rd year acknowledgement of when Flint switched to, under emergency management, the Flint River as their source of water. For 2 years, the government told families, it's safe, relax. You know how many people I've met from Flint on this journey since I jumped into this race? I mean, a ton of them, but there's a story that has stayed with me. A woman who told me about, for 2 years, she questioned whether her water was fine because everyone knew the Flint River was not a clean water source. And she asked, is it fine, is it fine? But it looked fine, you could see through it, it didn't smell funny, it didn't taste funny. And they said, it's, you know, relax, it's fine. Then she finds out how high the lead levels are in the water that she'd been handing her daughter for 2 years. Think about the guilt that this mother has. Her teenage daughter, whose reproductive organs are forming during this time. What is this going to mean, not just for her daughter, but maybe her daughter's kids if she decides to have some? What happened to the people of the city of Flint is unconscionable. And what's further unconscionable is that this leadership in Lansing right now continues to tout putting money in a rainy day fund. And people still cannot drink their water in Flint, much less they can't even bathe in it. So job one is pulling out all those pipes, doing it as fast as we can, not putting money in a savings account until everyone in the state has drinkable water. That is a fundamental right. You cannot live without water. It's unconscionable in the Great Lakes state of a city that can't drink. Okay, do we have... Three, all right.
So the 3 issues that I'm most concerned about, and this comes from the top 10 and 10 and then the new ESSA law, was making sure there's equity in the educational system in Michigan. And that would include making sure that charter schools have the same requirements for supervision and testing that the regular ed does, or regular public, and also prohibit for-profit charters.
Yeah. Education is without question one of the things that we are not getting right in Michigan. And education is one of those issues in other states that people on both sides of the aisle find their common ground on. Here in Michigan, it's become a partisan issue because we know that there are well-heeled interests that have used their considerable wealth and influence to defeat Republicans who don't agree with them and to push ones that they can push around. And now education is a partisan issue, and our kids are all paying a price for it. As a strong governor, unilaterally, now ultimately, I want to take back the state Senate. I want to take away the ability for legislators to draw their districts and have a nonpartisan commission do it. But a strong governor on day one can go in and start vetoing all these categorical funding, special interest projects, and infuse more resources into districts that serve an at-risk population and English language learners. And that in and of itself would have a huge boost in terms of helping districts that have disproportionate number of students that need additional support. And that kind of goes to the equity question that I think you raised. Charter schools in Michigan, the promise of charters was that they were going to be able to innovate, that they weren't going to be hampered by all of the restrictions that other schools have to abide. And by and large, charters have not produced any better success than the traditional public schools. In fact, some of them are worse. And in Michigan, 81% of our charter schools are for-profit. Do you know what the national average is of for-profit schools? 15%. So it tells you how far out of whack Michigan is from the national average. States like Tennessee, now I'm not saying we want to be Tennessee, but when you're at the back of the pack, you want to be anybody else. Tennessee is making strides. We want to be Massachusetts. We want to compete with the best of the best. But Tennessee is making strides. And one of the things that they've done is they have infused more resources into school districts with tougher socioeconomic challenges because that population needs more support. and they've outlawed for-profit charter schools. I offer the first one up as a concrete policy, and the second for thoughtful consideration, because that's ultimately a conversation that we need to be having in Michigan. So I thank you for raising both of those. Are you a teacher? Well, thank you for teaching. I think that's a profession that is not respected the way it should be, so I thank you for teaching. Anyone else that wants to weigh in?
Maybe not a question about an issue, but how can I volunteer to host a house party for you?
You just did. All right.
and really, how do we connect
Yes.
to be able to volunteer in that kind of way?
Okay.
To help you.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the lessons of 2016 is that we can't take anyone or anything or any vote or any community for granted. And that's why I got in this race as early as I have. And that's why I went to the UP in February. That shows how serious I am about getting around this state. But to stay connected is critical. To start a movement, you've got to agitate and educate and organize. And I think Donald Trump's doing the first two for us. But it's on us to get organized. So if you would join my ground game, which is helping me with the petitions, hosting an event, I'll come to your home. I would love to do that. Leveraging your networks and getting connected with the campaign. And GretchenWhitmer.com is the first best way to do it. We're building the website. It should be done in the next couple weeks. But you can get connected immediately through there. And we've got information out there too to reach out. But thank you for that. I would love to work with you, and I really appreciate your help.
Hi. I would like to see equality in wages between men and women, but then something that I don't hear as much about is the lower wages for positions that are traditionally held by women. So teachers, nurses, librarians, things like that. So what can we do to increase awareness of that issue as well?
Thank you for raising that. You know, when the governor and the Republicans pushed right to work through the legislature, you know, I stood outside, and the vast majority of people that were there were teachers and nurses, because that's who has benefited the most from having the ability to collectively bargain the terms of their employment. And so when there was an attack on collective bargaining, women were hurt disproportionately more than men. And I made that point on the Senate floor, and people looked at me, and a couple even said, oh, you just try to turn everything into a women's issue. No, when unions actually were the first best way for women to get pay equity, because every employee was paid the same. And that was such an important thing for women and women professions like that. One of the strangest questions I've gotten on the campaign trail is, are you going to run as a woman? Right. I know, right? That's how I wanted to react, but I'm like, do I have a choice? But honestly, but I'm learning. What you do is you seek the question behind the question. And the question is, of course, are you only going to talk about women's health issues, I think, or pay equity? But you know what? We have to figure out how to talk about these issues so that we don't, half the population doesn't tune out because they don't think it impacts them. Pay equity impacts every one of us. It impacts our sons, who we don't have as much to provide for. It impacts our fathers if we're taking care of them at the end of their life, because we don't have the resources to do everything that we should and need to be able to do. It impacts our partners or our spouses when we don't contribute as much. And it values their work time more than ours, which means they spend more time working. So we have to figure out how to really talk about this in a way that is inclusive and pulls more people into this fight. One of the things I think that is so beautiful about this new era that we're in, which it's hard to find good things, but one of the good things is we are finding that we are strongest when we are working on each other's issues, when we make them our issues. It's important for every one of us to say Black Lives Matter. It's important for every one of us to show up to environmental, science marches. It's important for every one of us to figure out how do we talk about this issue so that it pulls us all into the conversation and into the movement that we ultimately have to create here. And so I thank you for raising that. I'm a passionate advocate on that. And I gotta tell you, I have had the pleasure of working with women on both sides of the aisle that have found some common ground here. But by and large, Republican women with whom I've served kowtow to the state chamber who doesn't want to see pay equity. And so we have to elect more Democrats. We have to elect more women Democrats in particular.
So there are two things. The first thing that concerns me is what happened in North Carolina when they elected a Democratic governor and the Republican Congress decided to begin to remove all of his powers as part of that. So I worry about that happening here. I want to make sure that not only are you elected, but that we have a majority so that there is no risk of any of that garbage going on. So that's my first point. My second is my question about the divide that exists. I have seen here, especially in the west side of Michigan, the divide in families. Those who voted for 45 and those who did not. And how they're not speaking to each other. We see the divide in our state between Democrats and Republicans. We see the divide between Bernie supporters and Hillary supporters, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about beginning to heal or resolve that divide. You know, I caution, or I slow down thinking about the word healing because that sounds so feminine, but it is exactly what needs to happen. So I'm wondering about your thoughts about that.
Well, thank you for raising that. You know, when I spoke at the Women's March in Lansing, it was such a great day. I got to tell you, being around 9,000 people, the day after, you know, what the inauguration after a tough election, and it was so nice to be there. But I really put a lot of work into what I wanted to say. And, you know, I know that there was a lot of, there were a lot of fiery speeches across the country, but I thought it was important to say, listen, we need to seek to understand why people were so unhappy that they voted for Donald Trump, or they were so unhappy, more importantly, that they didn't vote at all. Now, as I'm traveling, as I'm talking to people, they say, how do we pull all these Trump supporters back into the Democratic Party? That's the wrong question.